Hey everyone, my name is Kenneth, and today I'm going to be talking about one of the oldest controls that's used on our furnaces. This is the Ranco, and it has been used on our stoves since, well, the mid to early 2000s, and we still use it on our C series today. It's a very simple control, and I'm going to go through the wiring and some settings and a little bit of troubleshooting. So this is how they come brand new. It's got 4 screws holding on the cover. You have your temperature probe here. On the stoves, these go into the back of the tank. Well, most of the times it's in the back. Different models or different locations, but this goes into a dry well that's threaded into the tank to read water temperature. So when the cover is taken off like this, there's a little plastic flap here that folds out of the way. And we have 6 terminals inside here. On this side is your relay terminals. So you have your common here, you have your normally open and your normally closed. And then up here on this side, you have your terminals to power the Ranco, to power the actual control side and the screen. So this is your common terminal, and then your 120 and 240. So how it's going to be hooked up in the stove, you have your neutral wire going to this terminal right here, and then your hot wire going to this one right here. So I'm going to go ahead and wire this up like it would be wired in a stove. So with these terminals, you just use the small Phillips on the new ones, and put it down fairly far. You can see that terminal opening up down there. Some of the older ones have a flathead, but the setup will still be the same. There's just a couple of small differences. So we are going to be using the common terminal down here, as well as the normally open. Normally open means that when the relay is not closed, when the relay is not activated, it just won't send power from the common terminal to the normally open. When it is activated, it closes the circuit between those two. Okay, so this is pretty much universally how it's going to be wired. You've got your neutral coming in here, and we're trying to do 2 things with the power supply that we have here. First of all, we need to power the actual Ranco itself so that the screen lights up, and that's what this terminal does. So we're running the main hot leg into that terminal, and then we also have to provide power to the common side of the relay, so we put a jumper down here to provide power to that as well. So the power coming in is doing 2 different things. And then this is our power output, this red wire, and it will be red in the stove usually. On some of the older stoves, it has a separate wire going to the fan, separately from the damper, I believe. So sometimes you'll have a red and a yellow wire going to the back of the stove. Most of the time it's just going to be a red wire. Generally speaking, this is what you will find when you open up your Ranco. So what I'm going to do now is put this together and put power on it and run through the settings and some things to watch out for. Okay, got power on it here. I just have it wired to a plug, and my output is capped off so I don't tickle myself. This control is used in a lot of different scenarios, so it can be set up different ways. So I'm just going to run through the settings here. So anytime you push a button for the first time, it just brings the light on. Then you hit set 1 time, and you have your Fahrenheit Celsius setting. Make sure this can be seen. Fahrenheit Celsius, and I'm going to set it up like I would set it up for a stove. So the set point is set at 70. Comes from the factory at 70, so we're going to put that all the way up to, generally I put it on 170 for a furnace. If it's a furnace if it's an older stove or it's prone to overheating, like if it's got leaky gaskets, I might set it down to 165. I would not go cooler than 165 or 160, just because you know, it tends to get down into the sweating range if it gets down too low. Generally, it'll start sweating if it gets below 140. But I like to keep it up about 165 to 170. So it tends to run a little bit drier. So that's the set point. That's what the Ranco will try to make the stove reach. And then after that, I have to go cycle through this again. Set point is 170, and then we have a 5-degree differential. So the way this is set up right now, it's going to allow 5 degrees of variation off of the set point before it sends power on this wire again. So right now it's set on 5. Generally, I would set it on 10 for the winter time. Now, if it's warmer weather and your stove wants to go out on you, you can set this number down to 3, and it'll just run the stove more often and not for as long of a cycle, and so that the coals will tend to stay lit better because they're not sitting as long in between cycles. So that's the differential setting. Now this next one is important. This is C1 versus H1, and listen here. We'll hear it click here in a second. Yep, there it clicked. Okay, so what that did, I changed it to heating mode instead of cooling mode. Since this control can be used in a wide range of different applications, you can run this to either cool something or heat something. In a stove situation, if you set this to cooling, it is going to try to send power on this wire until it gets cooler than the set point. So that's a problem because on a stove, when you send power on this wire, it heats it up. So what will happen is it'll just keep running the fan and the stove will go way over temperature. So that's important to keep on H1. And then on the next setting is a delay setting that in the stove world we don't use. So and that's your last setting there, and you're back to your set point. So right now I have it set on H1. Right now I have power on this wire because the temperature that this probe is reading is 67 degrees. And so it's going to send power on this wire until it gets to the set point of 170. So that's the basics of how it works. Generally on the stove, this red wire will go directly to a high limit switch, and I'll get one of those to show you. So out here on a new C150, this limit switch up here in the top is what we're talking about. So the red wire comes back here from the control. When the control sends a call for heat, it's going to send electricity through here and then back out this side of this limit switch, and then it can come all the way down here to the fan and damper. And there's different setups. On the older stoves, it's just clamped against the tank, you know, wide open, and you can see it a little easier. A lot of the new ones aren't labeled quite, or a lot of the older ones aren't labeled quite this well. But you can kind of see it behind there. And I will show you one just inside so you can see what it looks like. So there's different variations, but this is mainly what you'll see. It's just a little snap disc that clamps onto the tank on the stove. And it's just a temperature limit switch. So you can see the little numbers down here on the bottom. It says limit 190 minus 40 Fahrenheit. And what that means is that when the surface that this is clamped against reaches 190 degrees, it's going to break the connection between these two terminals. So basically what that means is that your fan will stop running. Like if this thing was set on C1 and it was sending a continuous signal to try to, you know, cool the stove, which doesn't work because you're running the fan. But say this was sending a continuous signal, then this would break that signal once it got up to 190. So it's just a safeguard. Once that signal is broken, once this thing snaps, the tank will have to cool back down 40 degrees. So it'll have to go back down to 150 before it resets itself and allows a signal to be sent again. So if your Ranco is reading like 155 and it should be sending, it should be blowing air on the fire, should be heating back up, but it's not. It's a high possibility that that snap disc has snapped and that your stove went over temperature. If that happens, you should start looking for air leaks somewhere on the stove. So just know that when you're troubleshooting this, know that this little snap disc is in between this control and your fan and damper. So if your fan and damper aren't running and they're supposed to be, it's a high possibility that this has tripped. And one way you can actually reset this quicker, and I've done this a number of times if I'm impatient for the stove to cool back down, you just pop this out, make sure that you turn the power off, pop this out of its little clip there in the back of the stove and just blow on this surface until you'll hear a little ping sound inside it, and it'll reset and you can put it back in, and then the control will work again, or then the power can get through it again. Here in the owner's manual or the installation manual, it talks about the error messages. You will get some error messages sometimes, or it's possible to sometimes. So the E1 basically means that if you press the up or down button when it's not in programming mode, it'll just show E1. So that's nothing to worry about. It just means that that button's pushed. So E2, you can kind of read over them there. The only ones that I've really seen is the EP, and that happens if the probe is damaged. So somewhere, like if I had one time a mouse chewed this wire and it was open, and so it just sent an EP message here on the screen. And another way that can happen is if the stove gets low in water and the dry well is no longer insulated by water. If it's out in the open air and the stove is overheating, sometimes it can melt this probe. So that's why it's really important to keep that stove full of water at all times when you have a fire in it. Pretty easy to change a probe. You can actually just snip the wire and get a new probe and just wire nut the two wires together. Works like a champ. I've done it hundreds of times probably. So that's pretty simple. But if you do get an EP message on your control screen, it means you should check the wiring and check the probe. Look in the dry well and see if it looks like it got melted. To replace this, you'll pull it out of the dry well, and then sometimes you have to use a small drill bit or something just to clean it out. To get if it's melted, you'll have to get some plastic out of the hole. But then this should slide right into the dry well, and you put a dab of silicone on the base of it to hold it in there. So that's pretty much the rundown on a Ranco, and feel free to leave a comment if you have any more questions, and we will try to answer you.